welcome back. Hope everyone's had a good morning. We're really going to get into the detail this afternoon, I think. So I'm Mark, you saw me earlier. I'm delighted that I've been asked to introduce Kirsty Walker, Vice President of External Engagement at University College London. Now, Kirsty's going to say a bit about her background, but in many ways she brings a really unique range of experiences into the sector, having previously worked both as a journalist and also in government. So I think you're going to tell us a little bit about that. Kirsty's been at UCL for about 4.5 years. So she started in 2018. I was at UCL 2007 to 2016. So between us, you've got almost, 15 years of experience of one of the world's great universities, which I'm sure you're going to tell us about. And horror shows, plenty of those. So Kirsty's got some slides she's going to talk to, but there's going to be plenty of time for questions. So do please treat this as a workshop type environment where we're going to have lots of discussion in a few moments. So Kirsty, over to you.
Taylor Swift and then Mark Sudbury. So yeah, I was going to make a joke about a getaway car, but I think I won't. Hello to everyone, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. This is my first Reputation Week appearance here in Madrid, and I hope it will be the first of many, and it's just so lovely to see so many of you colleagues from the UK, but universities from around the world and here in Spain. So thank you very much for having me and for inviting me to speak today. So sorry, that's a really scary big picture of me. But I thought I'd give you a little bit of context about who I am, and that will hopefully help to frame this talk today and some of my thinking, particularly around thought leadership and how we can use thought leadership to really drive academic reputation and also engagement through thought leadership. So I'm a former national newspaper journalist. I spent 17 years of my career at the front line of journalism. I worked for the Daily Express and Daily Mail, two quite, some of you will know, but quite right of centre newspapers in the UK, and I spent most of my career as a news journalist, but then most of my latter part of my journalistic career as a political journalist. So frontline politics, where I covered over 3 general elections and travelled around the world with a number of different prime ministers, including Gordon Brown. So Paul, Andrew and I, the first speaker today, actually crossed swords many years back when he was doing communications for Gordon Brown and I was on the other side. I then worked out that having 2 small children was not conducive to Westminster politics or indeed to national newspaper journalism. So I switched, went from a poacher to a gamekeeper, as they say in the trade, where I joined a public relations agency, and I really learnt to cut my teeth there on communications and PR, where I supported many individuals, organisations with corporate reputation and landing their messages. So I did about 4 years there, and then went to work for the UK Civil Service, where I worked for the Social Mobility Commission in the Department for Education. So I gained an experience of the complexities of Whitehall and working in a very large, complex organisation. So now I've been at UCL, thank you Mark, for 4.5 years now, and I was hired as Director of Media, and that really sort of takes me back to Paul's originally, his opening presentation about the importance of higher education institutes really understanding and engaging with the media. So I did that role first of all. In the last 4 years, my role has expanded significantly, and I'm now the Vice President External Engagement. I sit at the top table in the senior leadership team at UCL, and I'm responsible for leading up marketing, brand, events, digital, media, public affairs, communications, both internal and external. So that's just a bit about me with that scary picture. All right, I'm going to tell you a bit about UCL now. So this is the bit where we get to do our own brand reputation raising for our organisations, but I think it's probably quite helpful to give it a bit of context. You're probably wondering who the scary guy on the left is. That is Jeremy Bentham, who is one of the spiritual founders of UCL, and the reason his picture is up there in a sort of Andy Warhol pop art type configuration is because actually, if you want to understand UCL, it really is taking us back to our founding values around disruptive thinking. It was a very radical university when it was founded in 1826. That's nearly 200 years ago, and some of you, if you're doing your calculations, will work out that we have our bicentenary in the next 2 years, which is really driving a lot of our thinking around our strategy, our communications engagement strategy, as we head into that bicentenary. And we were founded on the principle that we would admit people from, we were the first in England to welcome students from any religion or social background. Now that was super radical at the time. So other universities that were part of the, or colleges as they were as part of the University of London, you had to sign the 39 Articles of the Church of England. So the university is a homogenized, think a certain way. UCL was set up to be a disruptor. And the reason I'm mentioning that today is that's very much part of our values still today. We are a radical university founded on radical principles. And we were also the first in England to welcome women to university education on equal terms to men. And as you'll see, a few more stats there. And that really is that spirit of UCL, that brave, radical, and what we have as part of our brand identity now. We are the home of brave thinkers, of disruptive thinkers. So, rankings, it's very sort of relevant, isn't it, coming after the rankings presentation? And I loved Mark's point earlier, is the rankings, what drives the reputation, other way around. I think we've had many answers to that question this morning. But we are very proud to be amongst the best in the world. We're very pleased, just literally a week or so ago, a couple of weeks ago, we were granted the accolade of the Times and Sunday Times University of the Year 2024. We're ranked 9th in the world, that's QS World Rankings, and 4th in Europe. And we really do pride ourselves on academic excellence, academic and teaching excellence, I should also say. So we're 30 Nobel laureates. We were 2nd in the UK for research power under the recent Research Excellence Framework. We are huge, so probably not as big as some institutions here, but you'll note 51,000 students, and UCL has grown exponentially. I think, Mark, how many did we have when you were there? 38, yes. That gives you a size of the size of UCL has grown quite significantly over that time, and we now have 11 academic faculties, and some of them we've grown through mergers with some really great brands in their own right. The School of Pharmacy, the Institute of Education. And we have over 16,000 employees now, so you'll get an idea that we're very huge, and that brings its challenges as communicators, because we are a very large and complex organisation, as Mark will attest. Yeah, so here are some of the faculties that we represent here at UCL. We have 2 in #1 in the world, that's the Institute of Education and the Bartlett School of the Built Environment. And we have a hugely... our tagline is London's Global University, and we're really proud to be a genuinely diverse global community at UCL. So we have over 350,000 alum in 190 countries more around the world. We've got 34% of our staff are international, and 55% of our students are international, and actually our students represent, again, around 150 countries around the world. So, a little bit of background there about UCL, and really the context for London's Global University is the sort of framing of my question, challenge really to all of us in this room is around the external climate in which we're operating in, and particularly with my background as an ex-journalist, I've always got an eye on the external environment, and again, sorry about all the Greek here, but the term polycrisis, and there's been much written about this, about how we currently are living in the age of the polycrisis. Now that was a term that was first coined in the 1970s, and it's been popularized by the historian Adam Tozer to describe the coming together of multiple crises. And I'm sure all of you, if I asked you in the room, you'd be able to name the top 3 or 4 quite easily. But of course, we're just still recovering and still in, and to some extent, the COVID-19 pandemic. We've got the war in Ukraine, growing geopolitical tensions, domestic political tensions across pretty much most Western and other nations around the world. And we've been, all of us, living with an energy crisis and a cost of living crisis that's affecting our staff, our students, our partners. And Toes described the word polycrisis as if you've been feeling confused and as though everything is impacting on you all at the same time. This is not a personal, private experience. It is a collective experience. No, sorry, this won't all be depressing, just to let you know. But I'm going to start with some of the gloomy framing, but actually then I want to turn this round and present the opportunity this poses to us as communicators. So this is a recent Ipsos Mori Reputation Council survey, and as you'll see, the question was asked, what keeps chief operating officers awake at night? Some of the ones we mentioned just then, this is polycrisis, here you go, and I'm sure there's another 10 you could probably add to that. But the big ones, geopolitics, post-COVID culture engagement, inflation, cost of living crisis, ESG and net zero, the war for talent, media, and go on, culture wars and polarization. That's something I'm going to be coming back to. And that's COOs, that's corporate sector business leaders. But what also, so all of that, but what also keeps vice-chancellors and university leaders and rectors awake. Now, this is quite UK context, so I'll be really interested when we get to the question and answer session to hear, and one of my challenges back, so start thinking about it. Is this something that you're all seeing in other countries? So we heard a bit from Paul earlier about this is very much live for the US at the moment, but for the other countries, nations that you've come from, is this the same for you? Financial sustainability. That's a huge problem in the UK. This is really live at the moment. The value of the university domestic undergraduate fees has declined in real time because of the inflation. Meanwhile, research is not funded in the UK, so the full economic cost is not funded, which means universities have to plug the gap. So if we want to maintain our status as world-leading organisations, hold our place in those rankings, hold our reputation for research, we have to fund it. And how do we do that? In the UK, a lot of the top research-intensive universities are doing that through recruiting international students. And of course, then comes the challenge when we move to geopolitical tensions and that we are under great scrutiny from our political leaders at the moment around a reliance on international students. We're also under pressure from parents of domestic undergraduate students saying, why can't my child get into UCL, which by the way is almost nearly, I think it is as competitive as Oxbridge now to get in terms of our entry requirements. The sector, and there are some parts of the higher education sector in the UK that are struggling, and there is very real questions about the sustainability of some institutions, not ours, can I just add for the record, but this is obviously something that we're really worrying about and is live for all senior leaders in the UK. Staff and industrial relations, so that's a big issue. We've just recently come out of quite a few months of industrial, as we're still in actually, from some universities, industrial action, where our lecturers and academic staff we're not marking our students' work. And the reason I mention this is because this is really impacting on the UK's reputation as somewhere to study. And you saw from that chart there that Mark helpfully shared about postgraduate students, the marking and assessment boycott. These are students that came for a year and didn't get their work marked. Just think about that for a moment, and the struggle. This is also the generation for undergraduates that's just also gone through COVID, who weren't able to set their A levels, and then they came to university online, and then they haven't had their work marked. So it's a big reputational issue affecting UK universities. Students' mental health and well-being kind of connected to COVID as well. Government instability. Literally just in the last 2 days, our Prime Minister has announced a complete overhaul of our A-level system and now wants students to do maths and English to A-level and a whole bunch of other things. And of course, we've got emerging technologies, AI, and we haven't really, it's amazing, we've come through a communications conference today and no one has yet mentioned the word AI, which is going to fundamentally change the way all of us operate in universities, but also how we communicators do our work. That also comes with opportunities. I'd like to see a show of hands now. How many feel that they're on top of the AI emerging trend in communications? I'm not going to put my hand up here, but we are starting to think about it. We know government is the Government Communications Service, are thinking very radically about how AI is going to transform communications. And the director of the UK Government Communications Service recently gave a talk when he said the role of the press officer is dead. Why do you need press officers if you can get press releases written by AI, was the question. I would argue very strongly with him that we do. So culture issues, freedom of speech and academic freedom. I'm going to come on to that in a minute, but growing scrutiny over quality and value. I'm going to come on to that in a minute. And a dropping in the rankings. That keeps Vice-Chancellors awake at night. Okay, so let's move to the higher education. This is the external context, and Mark quite rightly asked the question, how are we going to know what our strategy is if we do not know what our audiences think? And so this is public, so this is general UK public, again, very much with the proviso that this is a UK context, but again, I think it's probably shared elsewhere. So this was research that Universities UK, which is our big sector body that represents all universities in the UK, did. And I'm going to note this is 2018. Okay, so this was pre-COVID, but I think it's relevant for the next slide. And so the good news, actually, this isn't as bad as the United States and those scary figures that Paul Andrew was showing us earlier, because generally the public are neutral or indeed positive towards universities. So that's your 48% positive and neutral. So that was actually quite a lot higher, but only 1 in 10, that's 11%, are likely to advocate for universities. And whilst the big finding was, whilst not sort of spontaneously, I'll move on to this in a bit, but research does not figure. If you ask the public, what do universities do? They think we teach Harry Potter studies to undergraduate students. They don't realise, and they don't automatically recognise, well, they didn't in 2018, that universities are literally having real daily impact on the world through transformative research and innovation. So, but when prompted, and spoke to the public about, actually, this is what universities do, research, and this is the impact it might have, science and medicine, the examples that Paul gave earlier, it is seen as driving positive rates of satisfaction towards the higher education sector. So the UK redid this work quite recently and have just released the findings of it, and rather depressingly, so this is after COVID, after universities were responsible for developing and manufacturing the COVID vaccine that's literally saved lives and got us all back on planes to places like Madrid, still the public don't really see that we do research, which is quite staggering. And what the public do consider that there is a wider economic worth for universities, and they point to the fact that we create jobs, that we train the workforce, that we address skill shortages, and we drive prosperity through increased economic activity in university towns and cities. And that's one of the great things about universities is, particularly in the UK, wherever you go in the UK, there will be a great university that is supporting jobs and the local economy. But still, research, the role of universities in research and innovation is often far from mind. And still, when prompted, so this is 2023, this is 5 years later, many of the public are still unsure about how this side of universities work. And they want to know how it relates to the teaching side with which they're more familiar. So they still think that what we do, and that's partly to do with the way that the UK higher education sector has developed, and what some might argue is an increasing marketisation of the sector. Value for money is a big question in the UK because we charge £9,250 a year to study with us. And again, the public recognise that actually universities do have, particularly our world-leading universities, do have a positive role to play in driving a country's international reputation. So that's soft power, if you like. But again, that's mostly seen through the lens of educating international students and boosting graduates' prospects, and not through the world-changing research and innovation that's having a massive impact every day on the real world, tricky, wicked problems that are keeping everyone up at night, and that's why we're living in a polycrisis. So this is my challenge, this is the question to all of us in the room. Is the social licence of our universities under threat? I'm seeing quite a few people nodding here, but this is the thing that we have been grappling at UCL, and I think we really need to ask ourselves this question, and if so, what on earth are we going to do about it? Now, I'm a relentless optimist. You wouldn't believe that from the first few slides, but I am. And as Winston Churchill once famously said, we should never waste a good crisis. Although in the context of this talk, perhaps it should be we should never waste a good polycrisis. So yes, the higher education sector is under increased scrutiny. We are failing utterly to convince wider audiences of our value and our worth. But we do know that we can change that. So one of the things that the UK research came back quite strongly with is that they questioned and they started to dig around at what are the themes that would start to shift the dial? So what are the themes that would have the most impact on wider external audiences in this external context that we're operating in? So they were looking particularly here at media and political leaders, as well as the general public. And the three themes that UK came up with, and we're now taking to communicators within universities, this is what will start to try and hopefully move the dial. Quality and value of university education, we need to make the case for that more clearly. How universities support economic growth and opportunity, particularly in an age where we are all in still economic crisis and cost of living, etc. And importantly, the role of universities in delivering solutions to global challenges, which we are not yet convincingly, collectively, all of us in this room and beyond, not just us, we're not solely responsible, obviously, that we need to start moving the dial on. So the theme really there's lots of, this is a big question, but the area that I really wanted to focus in on today is around thought leadership. So I wanted to sort of look at how we might be able to use thought leadership as a particular tool and tactic to start to really drive reputation and show how universities might distinguish themselves, particularly in answering the role that we have in answering the big global problems of the day. Before I do this, I'll talk about so I wanted to talk about what is thought leadership, really, because I'm sure many of you will absolutely know that. But thought leaders are people who have expertise on a particular subject or field, whose ideas can influence others. They have the ability, thought leaders, to identify challenges and provide insights to help solve those great wicked problems. And thought leadership can build credibility for individuals as well as the wider institution. And Edelman did a study where it looked at they asked businesses whether they thought leadership was an effective way of enhancing perceptions of an organisation, and 89% of decision makers reported they thought leadership was effective, enhancing the reputation of organisations. And a further 59% of decision makers said they used thought leadership to vet a company's capability. And also 40% of decision makers said they thought leadership influenced their purchasing decisions. And what done well and authentically, thought leadership can differentiate higher education brands. And I think all of us who've undergone brand refreshes or quant and qual, stakeholder insight using Mark's brilliant World 100 tracker will know that actually one of the biggest challenges we've got is how do we stand out in a highly competitive global marketplace? What differentiates ourselves within the sector? So thought leadership is my view that can really start to make the difference and move the dial in terms of understanding, particularly when it's aligned and it's authentic and aligned to an organisation's mission, values and strategy. And the corporate sector gets this. So the corporate sector, you may have heard this if you were around yesterday, but really gets the value of thought leadership and also investing traditionally in communications. And as Paul said earlier, we have seen a massive shift in universities getting this, but we were quite late to the game. So we are now, everyone in the room, everyone gets the value now within the higher education sector. So, and Paul's challenge earlier about how do we then move forward with this is something I'm keen to pick up at the end of this talk as well. So the good news, I'm going to give you some good news now. There you go. Scientists are the most second trusted profession in the world after doctors. Yes, so you can see where I'm going here now, can't you? So we are absolutely swimming in thought leaders in universities. Our academics, our scientists, our staff, our students, and particularly our scientists, they're trusted, and the world is facing unprecedented challenge. The problems are huge, and we have the people within the walls of our institutions that may not have the answers immediately, but can certainly drive national debate, influence policy, and so yes, we're scientists. Hold on, let me move on to that one. So we have an opportunity here, all of us in the room, to drive academic reputation through the thought leaders that are under our own roofs. So what is academic thought leadership? And it's really important here, and that we kind of touched on this a bit with Paul earlier, but I do think there is a distinction between individual academic thought leadership and that of an institution, so which is much more challenging. So I'm going to go and talk about these two as different entities. So academic thought leadership, I just wanted to sort of talk here about what we've been doing at UCL, which is really seeking to position UCL as the go-to authority for thought leadership for our academics. So that's involved a very proactive, a great deal of investment and time and resources into promoting UCL academics in the media. And one of the ways we've been doing this is trying to get on the front foot with the news agenda. So we have been investing in tools and a huge amount of time into forward planning and horizon scanning. So we're able to know and the infamous communications grid, which I'm sure you all have in your institutions, but making sure that we are fully on top of what's happening over the next coming days, months, years, and making sure that UCL academics in particular are positioned at the forefront. So an example of that would be there's an earthquake. That's the reactive stuff, but there's an earthquake, immediately we have a bank of experts that we will push straight out to media. And media slowly and have now started to recognise UCL as the go-to place for media in the UK, and you'll see there that it started to get picked up externally as well. So it's also around promoting thought leadership comment pieces, op-eds, those answers to the big questions, the big problems facing the world, that we've been doing really proactively, working with our academics. One of the things we do need to invest in as institutions is support and training for academics to give them the confidence, the skills to move, which is into something that is quite beyond their comfort zone in many ways. They're quite happy in their labs with their collaborators, and actually some of them are just terrified or just don't want to do media at all, and actually also don't necessarily have the skills and ability to communicate to the media. And when I say media, I mean the wider public, in a way that's compelling, telling their story, and understanding what their messages are, and then the writing side. So we've invested quite heavily in supporting our academic community with giving them the confidence and skills to become thought leaders, and that's involved a huge amount of media training. So we now have organisational development programmes for media training that our academics can plug into. We're partnering with organisations like the Conversation UK, which is a great platform for academics to work directly with journalists, and I know the Conversation UK is operating in many different areas around the world, and also with organisations like the Science Media Centre as well. And we're also using that for self-generated content for our own channels. So it's not just putting it out in the media, promoting that expert comment. It's also about really promoting that on our own channels now. So in the last year alone, we've published 224 thought leadership pieces. That's comment, analysis on big, tricky questions by UCL academics. And we're starting to see the dial move, and I know the question will be, well, how do you measure the impact on it? And actually, so some of the things I hear from some of my competitor universities is, why do we bother with media? It's just a mention, nobody notices it's UCL. I have a different view on that. I do genuinely think that media engagement and repeated mentions and top of mind, appearing on all the major news channels, which, by the way, everyone says news media is dead. I don't buy that either. The news brands, print might be, but the news brands still have a strong influence in the online world. And actually, when you sort of look at social media channels, most of the content they're picking up is still from those well-known mainstream news brands. So in the last year, our share of voice against our global competitors has moved, and I'm proud to say we now outperform our UK university competitors in both share of voice, that's volume, that's mentions in the media, but also in reach, and so that's readership. Now that was a change from 2021 when we were falling behind some of our key competitors, particularly in London. I'm obviously won't go into detail of who those are. And actually, we saw that was actually a major factor, one of the big factors in us getting University of the Year from the Times and Sunday Times this year. And it was explicitly mentioned by the editor of the Sunday Times Good University Guide that acknowledged the prominence of our academic experts in the media on issues such as climate change, public health, and inequalities as one of the reasons why the Sunday Times felt that we should be awarded University of the Year. So the media, having engaged academics using thought leadership in the media, has been really helping to drive UCL's reputation both internally and externally. Of course, internal audience and our internal employees, our staff, our students are incredible advocates, and I think we don't use them enough within higher education institutions. There's a lot of talk about internal communications, which I hate as a term. I prefer to refer to internal engagement. So that's that two-way listening with a community and encouraging our employees to be advocates for our institutions. And there is a lot of pride in media coverage when our internal audiences turn on the radio and hear that we're on the Today programme again. It really does drive internal pride as well in an institution. Where am I? Yeah, I'll move on to the next one. So institutional thought leadership. So I really did want to sort of draw a bit of a distinction between the two. So individual academics, deeply committed to freedom of speech, academic freedom, and I know someone is going to ask me the question, what happens when your individual academics say something you don't like, which, as we know, happens quite often. So we celebrate that, because that is what we do as a university. We are a place, we're a home of radical disruptive thinkers, and those disruptive thinkers, we will defend their academic freedom to the hilt, even when it's potentially directed against us, which it is sometimes. But the difference between institutional thought leadership, so our President Provost, Dr. Michael Spence, has been really outspoken on this issue. He's got a really clear line on this, which is that universities, we are the forum for debate. We're the forum for free speech, for academic freedom, rather than an active participant. So we don't take issues on the big political, social, economic, national policy issues of the day. And we're often asked, as I think someone asked that question earlier, and our community are always trying to push us into a position of taking us aside. And the stance we have now is that we won't. It is for our staff and our students, our academics, our community to have that debate. And we will celebrate that, we will encourage that. Rather than us as the institution or senior leaders that embody the institution taking a view on that. But that does not mean we cannot speak out on issues that directly affect the core operating business of the university. So that won't stop us lobbying or speaking to the government about our concerns on visa and immigration strategy, for example, or issues that are directly aligned to agreed core values and strategy of the university, and I'll move on in a bit to how we're doing that. But what's key to institutional thought leadership is clearly the senior leaders of the university, who, in our case, we've got a very eloquent Vice-Chancellor who's very externally engaged. So that's really obviously hugely important, but it shouldn't just be the Vice-Chancellor. And if we're going to drive this culture of shared responsibility for the mission and values and strategy of a university, that's for all of us as university leaders to engage in and to sell and to argue for. And deep stakeholder engagement strategies. So Mark really touched on this about understanding who your audiences are, and we're doing a big piece of work at UCL on this now. But one of the ways we've particularly developed our stakeholder strategy over the last year and a half is through identifying quality stakeholders that we want to most engage with, and then adopting strategies. To Mark's point, university audiences are complex and immense, and we cannot engage with all of them. So, for example, in London, we've now got a London team that are working really hard to listen and engage with our local communities in Hackney and in Camden, and asking then we go to our stakeholders and say, how can we help? How can we support you? We have the might of UCL. We have this world-leading university across multiple disciplines that can help you to address the problems that you've got. How can we help? And it's amazing how many of our stakeholders almost sort of, fall off their chair with that very question. But we're working really closely with our communities in Camden and Newham. What's your problem? Camden say to us, well, we've got a real problem with pollution. So we've got an multidisciplinary academic team working with Camden to try and solve the problems they have locally. And on public affairs, 2 years ago, well, a year and a half ago, a university like UCL that's nearly 200 years old, it did not have a public affairs team. And actually, this is a growing trend in the UK as well. And we were outsourcing our own institutional interests to sector bodies who, while extremely good, are representing the views of the entire sector. So in the case of Universities UK, that's over 140 universities. In the case of the Russell Group, that represents research-intensive universities, I think it's 24. And so it's really difficult, when we have an issue that might affect the core business of UCL, or a challenge that we might need to talk to political stakeholders, we really didn't have the expertise or networks or relationships to be able to do this. So we've set up a public affairs strategy in the last year and team, and actually you'll be seeing this across a lot of higher education institutions. So we think about the professionalisation of communications. That's now moving very firmly into government relations strategy, which is partly linked to the first few slides around how difficult the world is, and it's really difficult to get our message across. So we need teams of in communications, teams of experts that know how to communicate with government stakeholders, to engage with them, and also crucially to understand the issues that they are worried about and want to engage with us on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, it's quite a brave campaign we've got at UCL, which is very much in line with our values of disruptive thinking, and sort of connects back to the big issue that a lot of us are grappling with, is culture wars and academic freedom and cancel culture and freedom of speech. We've decided at UCL we're going to take that on. It's quite brave, it's quite risky. We have launched a big internal and external campaign called Disagreeing Well. So crucially, that is not us taking a position on the issues of the day or issues our students might like us to take. It's around the art of how do we disagree well, and it's equipping our students with the skills and confidence to be able to learn how to disagree. So you'll see this was a student newspaper. I'm not quite sure what they were doing here with the yellow ring. I'll leave that to you to decide. But we started that with thought leadership. It's a view that our Vice-Chancellor our President Provost feels very strongly about. So we launched him in the UK around around the concept of disagreeing well, and we've been doing a lot in the media space around this, and interestingly that's then got a huge amount of engagement with government because they were hearing something that was different, slightly refreshing, and so we were getting audiences with ministers, invitations to appear in front of select committees. Right, move on. So this is quite a big campaign now, which we are growing now into a public phase. So we, back in a few months ago in June, we held the first of our internal events on disagreeing well, which was very much focused on our internal audience. We had over 500 attendees online and in person. Interestingly, what was most interesting about that event was that it was stormed by protesters. As Mark's laughing, it's UCL. So it literally, they came in with the megaphones, they took over the whole stage, and I was sitting at the back thinking, yikes, this is not going well, we should never have done this campaign. But actually, what happened was the protesters stood with their megaphones shouting, and the panel, one of whom is a professor in conflict resolution, absolutely managed to engage with the protesters. We let them have their say because that's what we do at UCL. We absolutely committed to that right to protest and that right to speech. And they ran out of steam and they left. And an academic came up to me at the end and said, wow, that stunt you pulled at the beginning with the protesters was remarkable. And I was thinking, no, it wasn't. But in that moment, it demonstrated the power of disagreeing well, talking, listening to the other side, humility. And that's really started to get us noticed. And this is a current Conservative cabinet minister, newly promoted to Energy Secretary, but her remit at the time was for the freedom of speech at universities. Now, ministers, Tory, particularly Conservative ministers, have been knocking universities up and down. Obviously, Rob from Exeter nodding furiously at me for cancelling speakers, and we've had that same censorship report by some right-wing think tank that was a load of nonsense and based on quite questionable evidence. But that was Claire Coutinho, a Conservative cabinet minister, directly in this tweet. She directly cited UCL as an example of how we can learn to disagree well. So that concept of using that thought leadership to start to try and move the dial in terms of how our external stakeholders see us. And this is, so we've got we're going to give you a bit of another flavour. So of course, along with the media and the public events and political engagement actually that we're leveraging through disagreeing well, we're also holding a whole series of external events, and we're actually launching it. No one's seen this, not even internally, so please keep it to yourselves. But this is our new campaign assets for disagreeing well. And we will, on November the 9th, literally advertise today. You can watch it online if you want. We are launching Disagree Well in Higher Education. Wish me luck. No, you might think that and crucially around disagreeing well, we're talking about the concept of disagreeing well, not the issues, although I'm sure others will try and drag us to that. And we've got a great chair for that. So we've got Hetan Shah, who's chair of the British Academy, Michael Spence, our president provost, and we've also got a renowned journalist and author of This Is Not America coming to speak. So that's the first of our public series. And then we're branching out. So we're then taking it out to our external audiences. We're looking at disagreeing well online, which is our next event, and we're going to be securing some interesting speakers for that. Disagreeing well in public life. Now that's going to be fun. I'm sure those politicians that want to engage with us are all going to be flocking to take part in that. And then we're doing disagreeing well between generations. So this is the first phase of our campaign. And also to say this isn't just an external campaign, this is an internal engagement internal engagement with our community as well, with our students, and it's actually explicit in our strategy that was developed with our community, and it's also core to our student union strategy. So our student union are running their own separate Disagree Well programme, including in this autumn they will be taking students to Northern Ireland, so for students to learn about conflict revolution. And we've got a staff project that we're also launching called Safer Spaces, which is working with independent facilitators to find ways to enable staff and students to hold conversations on the most controversial topics in respectful and civil and meaningful ways. And Michael Spence just literally 2 days ago was in Osaka speaking about this at a major keynote lecture as well. So this is something also that we're hearing. We've already had a request to come and speak in the States on this issue. So it's really starting to get the attention. And actually, the greatest compliment is we're seeing other vice-chancellors picking up the phrase "disagree well," which is a great sign that it's catching on. And we've just been used as a case study for Universities UK. Has just issued guidance on freedom of speech in UK universities, and Disagree Well at UCL is one of the core case studies in that. So I'm going to be quiet in a minute. Oh yes, I'm going to do this bit. I was going to conclude first. Sorry, that's a teaser. So. Really, we're living in highly uncertain times, and with times of polycrisis and global uncertainty, the challenges facing the world today are greater than they have ever been. But universities have a crucial role to play in addressing those wicked problems through delivering solutions to those global challenges, and that's through research and innovation and supporting economic growth and opportunity and providing quality education. But we, as communicators, need to do more to demonstrate the positive impact that universities and our communities are having on the world. And I do believe that thought leadership provides us with a real opportunity for institutions and individual academics to demonstrate both the value and, crucially, values of their institutions and thoughts, both through individual academic expertise and at an institutional level. And so this can help drive and promote academic reputation, both internally and externally, but it has to be done authentically and it has to be done well. So that's my conclusion. But now I couldn't find a way to fit this into the talk. But having said all that, actually brand influencers, that's the way to go. So that's Sarah Jessica Parker, Sex and the City, Carrie Bradshaw. See what she's carrying there? UCL tote bag. So all the work that I can do here, so the internet has blown up and we have just had to desperately restock tote bags, which are now apparently the must-have fashion item of the day. I couldn't find out a way to fit it into the talk, so I just thought I'd throw it in at the end there. Look, she's even carrying two. I didn't realise this was very on trend, but we do now know it is. Everyone keeps asking me, how did you do that? My lips are sealed, I'm not going to tell you. It's a mystery. So that's it, thank you very much. What I would like to do to steal, actually I spoke for way longer than I thought, sorry, if I'm long, I've got 10 minutes. So I was going to steal a bit out of Paul Andrews' playbook, actually, and ask the questions back to you, rather than, I'm very happy to take questions. But actually what I really want to understand, particularly for non-UK universities, is that something you recognise? Is that something you're asking yourselves about the social licence? Also keen to hear how others have built thought leadership engagement into their own brand building. And what are the enablers we need to support this? I talked about the training support for academics. And then crucially, how do we measure impact, particularly on thought leadership? Now my views on this is, does it move the dial in terms of your overall brand? So that's your NPS that Mark spoke about, and the unprompted brand awareness. And we're doing a big brand refresh at UCL, and we've started. It's too early to be able to kind of, hopefully I can come back to you next year and talk about what we've learned from the brand refresh. But one of the questions we are crucially asking is around whether UCL is a place where people can disagree well. And that will see whether we move the dial on that. So thank you very much for bearing with me and my I'll just leave that up. Thank you. So, sorry, I hadn't realised I'd talked so much.
You want to put those questions? Could we put those questions back up?
Yeah, how do I go back? Oh, there we go. There we go.
Okay, any thoughts?
It's making me take Carrie Bradshaw off the screen.
Thanks for your exposition. It was pretty great. I have one question.
Yeah.
talking about the thought leadership and the strategy,
Yeah.
sometimes it's difficult
Yeah.
to make professors to talk in the media. And nowadays that it's more difficult because of this polycrisis that you mentioned. Do you have any incentives in your university for those professors that talk or that are trained to talk in
Yeah.
the media?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I believe it's built into the promotion structures. So at UCL, academics that are externally engaged, and also media is just the output. So actually what really is most persuasive for academics, for media engagement, is to say the media is one thing. That's, you know, you might get a interview on the Today programme or a Newsnight, but it's what comes from that. So measuring the real impact of that media work. So most academics will then get invited to collaborate on projects, speak at conferences, to come and influence government reviews and policy. And so actually what we see is you do one bit of media work and then what is what it leads to. So I think from our point of view, what's worked really effectively is getting academic champions for thought leadership and media work. And when we do media training, it's all very well the communications professional and professional services coming out from outside her desk, but actually what really what our academics most are enthused by is fellow academics explaining how media has benefited their career, their work. So with our media training, we always team up with an academic champion. And we are lucky at UCL, we do have academics that get the value of engaging in media. And also it's a confidence thing. I mean, I did a lot of media broadcast interviews when I was a journalist, and it doesn't matter how many times you do it, it's terrifying. And, you know, I do Sky News, I do Good Morning Britain. I've been in some horrific, you know, car crash interviews, not for me, but being in the room. I got once asked, I was on Sky News Live, and I was sitting there minding my own business, talking about some development in politics. And England scored a goal in the football, and this newsroom erupted, and I had to keep trying to focus. I think we were talking about the Middle East at the time. And the presenter said, "I'm sorry about that. What's your reaction to the football?" And so I was left in the, so you have to, so it's partly also giving the skills and confidence to academics to deal with the media, know how to handle the tricky questions, also to communicate to academics that being in control of the way their story is communicated and released and listening to the advice of communications professionals in their media team will help them to land the story, their research in the way that they want to. Gives you an element of control over it. And sometimes doing nothing isn't an option. And we've had academics that say, I don't want to deal with the media. And the media's got hold of the story anyway. And they've twisted it and they've turned it and it's all over the press. And they say, how can you help now? Well, it's out there now. But no, it's working with them and helping them to understand the value of proactive media engagement and coming to us early, because the earlier you come to the media teams, the more you're likely to land a story in the way that you would like to. So hopefully that helps.
Any more questions? Or I'll ask one.
Oh, you're back. I'm going to ask you back. Where's my question? Go on, Mark.
So the campaign,
Yeah.
How to Disagree Well, are you concerned that someone or some group is going to test that?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the obvious thing is that, you know, speakers who are unpalatable to the majority of people in the university are likely to be invited by someone.
Yeah.
And I wonder, have you planned for
Yeah.
that, or actually will you see that as an opportunity to demonstrate what you're trying to do?
The example I cited to you just then, the protest that came in at the very end, and because it's the Michael Spence, our president provost, you know, there's sort of, you know, they want to be listened to. Yes, of course, it will happen. And but the way we're hosting the event, we're deliberately not asking very controversial speakers to come. And the idea is not to cause riots in the university. That would be really bad for everyone. It's to pick the right speakers, thoughtful speakers that will talk about the importance of disagreeing well and, you know, listening with humility, listening to the other side. And by framing that from the beginning, actually, of course you're going to get challenging questions. And, you know, some of our community are not happy that we're doing this at all. at all, and which is why it's not just a public event. This is part of a wider strategy. It's part of a conversation we've been having with our community for some time around living our values, which is front and central of the UCL strategy, and it's also because we're working very closely hand in hand with the union. Student union on this as well, on their own campaign. So yes, the answer to are we planning for protests and difficult conversations? Yes, and actually the prime job with all the events that we host at UCL is to keep people safe and to be able to have those conversations in a respectful context. And actually, I think our community now, whether they like, some of them won't like it, but know that we are a place that will allow the most controversial speakers sometimes to speak. And we will also create a safe space for those that want to protest that outside and make sure that that's done in a safe way. Watch this space.
Thank you so much, Kirsty. So,
Yeah.
round of applause.
Thank you.